Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. We haven't done one of these in a while, but an Ask Me Anything show was due. Got some great questions. We dive into three of them here. One on the newish anyway, two-liner C Class gliders. And to answer that one, I reached out to Malin Lobb, who's been on the show. We'll have another full show with him up here shortly, but he has been doing a lot of training for the Race Academy for the Brits and also half of Fly-Yo and handles a ton of the SIV there in Annecy and in other parts of the world. So we get into C-Class two-line gliders with Malin, and then a couple questions from the field about first bivvy attempts and what should you be thinking about, where should you go in the Alps, and when are you ready for bigger expedition type stuff. So I try to answer those and don't have much housekeeping other than to say, again, apologize that we're a little bit behind here, but this one, depending on when we drop this, should catch us back up, and then we'll get back on our regularly scheduled programming. Hope you're having a good summer, getting some good flights, having fun in the sky. Enjoy. Malin, good to have you back on the show. We're going to do a proper full-length show here in a little bit, but you're traveling with your family, and I just got back, and we're going to attack this question that came in for this Ask Me Anything show about two-liner sea wings. This is kind of a new breed of sea wings. Several manufacturers are making them and putting them out, and I didn't really have the expertise to answer this question, so glad you're here to be in my stead and answer it professionally, because you know a lot more about this stuff than I do, seeing how all these wings behave in SIV. Let me read the question first so you all can hear it, and then Malin, I'll hand it over to you. I'd like your take on the new crop of two-liner sea wings and things to consider when moving up from an ENC three-liner. They're becoming popular where I fly, but I know of two accidents happening within the last 2 weeks. One happened immediately after launch, where one side of the wing collapsed and the pilot ended up in the trees with no serious injury. The other happened when the pilot experienced a frontal while on bar, low over terrain, and in his words, the wing disappeared, only to come forward with a vengeance that he didn't adequately control and almost ended up in the wing. He landed and was able to walk out, but with a fractured vertebrae. In both cases, these are experienced pilots, but maybe not prepared for the extra control required by a two-liner. In the second case, the pilot mentioned the energy in the wing was so much greater than he expected. With only 2 rows of lines, it seems to me that any collapse is much more impactful, as there is no extra line support to help limit the extent of the collapse. How can the difference between a two-liner and three-liner be explained scientifically to help someone understand how collapses are different between the two? So, yeah, take it from there. You know, what's different from a manufacturing standpoint between a two-liner and a three-liner? How do they behave differently? What do we need to get out to the flying audience who's considering moving up to one? What are the pros? What are the cons, if any?
Well, thanks for having me back. I'm glad that those guys weren't seriously or too badly injured. There's quite a lot that could maybe be described a little bit better by designers, but from what I see, because we get a lot of these wings now in SIV, is if you are already on a three-liner C and you move to a two-liner C, you're not going to notice any difference. I've never got on a wing and felt that they had more or less attachment points. There's so much more involved in the span-wise cohesion of a wing, of the how solid and how much feedback a wing gives or how little it gives. And then there's a lot to play with: aspect ratio, the shark nose, how far back the A's are there, and then the pilot itself, the harness that you have with it. There's more than just one thing at play. But essentially, if you didn't look up and you're already used to flying an ENC, then you probably wouldn't feel any difference. In terms of collapses and how it's affected, so unless you have collapse lines on the SIV, you can't pull collapses. So there's a variety of other things that we get into. But I think one thing that people don't do enough of is try and fly defensively. And use a bigger input when they're getting a collapse. So maybe a downside of having less lines is it's going to be a bit more cravat prone. But if you're flying something with more aspect ratio, then that's going to become a bit more cravat prone as well, and potentially give you more feedback. But if you're going from the same aspect ratio, you shouldn't notice much difference. Now, they are more stable, so you should suffer less collapses, but potentially the collapses you do have are then going to be from more aggressive air. So it could be that pilots with softer wings or wings that collapse easier are used to doing smaller inputs to stop those collapses, and those are the sort of collapses that aren't even going to happen on a two-liner. So they're, they might be bigger or more violent than ones they're used to when they do happen, but they would still happen on their three-liner ones. But it depends on the wing you fly as to whether you're going to feel it or not. Some wings are they breathe a little bit more, they move a little bit more. What you don't want is a wing that's too solid and not giving much feedback. But these three-liner Cs, I think they're all really good in terms of their manageability and amount of feedback. There's definitely a spread from the highest end to the more entry-level ones. So there are ones that, if you're a bit tentative, that might be better than others to get into. But I think people have been hurting themselves on three-liner Cs for as long as they've been around, and the two-liners are no different. It all comes back to the pilot action at the time of a collapse. That's the most important thing.
And more, are these wings more compared to, a D2 liner or a CCC wing in terms of, holding on to them when they go, when they come back up? Pretty similar, different? How would you compare them? Because you've flown them all.
Yeah, no, I think they're exactly where they should be in the category. They haven't been shoehorned into the C category. They are the way that they fly, the energy they have, the feedback they're giving. They should be directly in the sports category. Like I said, if you didn't look up and you're already used to the power of and feedback of the Cs, then you probably wouldn't notice any difference. It's the question might be, should most pilots that are on Cs be on Cs? That's probably the better question. And then if that person then hurts themselves on a ENC three liner, someone might not think much of it. But if they've just moved to a one with two lines, then there's something to blame it on. I think the accidents that happen on these may be because there's this fear of the unknown. They might put it down to the wing choice rather than the pilot. But when someone crashes their three liner C at the moment, people just see it as an accident rather than something from the wing.
Hmm. Interesting. Would you still kind of classify this in the same category as what we have talked about over and over again on the show? When to move up? Is it do all the basic rules apply? It's, when you're pushing the wing you're on as hard as you possibly can, you're using its full scope of the speed system all the time. You're basically, in jockey's words, you're getting bored of the wing that you're on. You've maxed it out. You've maxed out the hours. You've maxed out you're observing 100%. You're not thinking about keeping the wing open. You're not looking at the wing all the time. You're in quote unquote ready. Is that any different with these? Is there any more kind of hesitancy? Is there any more, well, do you have X?
Well, I'd bring it again back to wing control rather than, well, it's both things. One, when you're at that stage where you're flying a wing like that, you have freed up all the bandwidth that you can free up. You're flying automatically, and that frees up as much bandwidth as possible to make good decisions. But wing control, then it comes down to, because you need to have done enough that you've covered all of the asymmetric collapses, the frontals, the auto rotations, unless you're going to buy collapse lines. But really, by the time you're on a two-liner C, you should have done enough collapses and collapse to rotations and auto rotations and stuff that you understand that enough that you're not going to let it happen again. And then really you don't need to bring collapse lines on the SIV, because we teach much more about how to use the Bs efficiently than we do about needing to focus on the collapses of of the wing itself. So like the spin point on the bees, the full range of the bees, doing rapid exits and catching on the bees, using the full like locking your legs at full speed and then coming back to trim speed just with your hands, and then finding the spin point. So there's a lot of exercises we can do that the pilot starts to learn to use the bee handles just as if they were brakes. The same rules apply. If you pull the full range and you leave it there, you're going to spin the wing. If you do a punch, you're not, and it's just like that on the brakes. And it's getting pilots confident enough that they can use the bees to their full advantage, because most people flying two liners don't use the bees enough. And then really they become safer. The three liners have only got a certain amount of travel on the seas. Even the ones with the pulley systems, it's not as effective as having the full travel of bees. So when you start to use speed bar more, and you're happy to sit at kind of half bar, 2/3, being efficient and using the wing like that, then that's where two liners not only come out in terms of efficiency and like into wind penetration and their glide efficiency, but also the safety of being able to keep the wing open at speed. I really think that they're safer in that respect than a three liner, because you have so much more control of your angle of attack.
Hmm. I'm not hearing a lot of downsides, really. I mean, it sounds like if you've spent some time with wing control, you've done your SIVs, you've got the hours, then it should be a handy tool.
Yeah, for sure. And there is different levels of them. Like the softest one we see is probably the Nova Codex. That's really quite a gentle, well, beginner one if you are apprehensive. Like, I don't really see a point in three liner Cs anymore. So if you're at the high B level, you've got some good pilot actions, because for me it's not the amount of SIV you've done, it's the pilot actions that you've gained from it. It should always be pilot focused with SIV. So if you're a nice dynamic pilot, you've got good brake range, you can stop rotations, you're flying your EMB well, you're happy to use speed bar and actively pilot, then I wouldn't even move to a three liner C. I'd go straight for a two liner. Just get one that the higher
So
level
the
ones, the Arctic R and the Photon, they've got the best performance, but they're the kind of at the top of the category. And then you've got the kind of the Volt being like mid range, Codex being quite a nice soft one. So they all have slightly different characteristics. Some are a little bit more punchy than others, but
hmm.
they have the performance. The ones that are slightly of the higher level of the category, they have the best performance. So it's always a trade off.
Hmm. What are you seeing, Malin, in SIV on these wings that are catching people by surprise? Anything? Was it same as ENDs and CCC wings on two liners?
Yeah, exactly the same. Yeah, they're not the right wing to learn stalls on. So if you haven't,
Yep.
well, you can, but they don't take kindly to being stalled badly. They and it's like even like a high level C wing, a three liner, isn't going to be very forgiving to a bad stall technique. Most wings these days need the two stage entry, which you're not going to be doing on your first stalls. They don't like being overstalled. So that's really no different to most modern wings. Even high Bs these days, you need to have the two-stage stall, dialed to make your life easy. It's just these wings have a little bit more power again, and they're just on the aspect ratio where you can start to use a three-stage stall and choke the tips a bit, but really that doesn't come into play too much. It's where I introduce the idea of controlling the speed of the tips once you've broken the foil. You don't really need it until you start getting into the D category.
Malin, I wanted to ask you, that just reminded me of something that's related, little unrelated. We just had US Nationals out in Chelan, and the last day we were all screaming towards goal, towards end of speed, and hit a pretty violent dusty that was about 1,000 feet over the ground and still wound up pretty tight where most of the gaggle hit it. And it was a rain of gliders. The edge of this thing was incredibly sharp. So if you didn't dive into it really hard, kind of got thrown out of the side. And so I was one of them that just glider blew up pretty fast, and I'm pretty familiar with the 2 stage, and I've done a lot of practice with that, but in this case, being in such a hardcore kinda combat situation, I just immediately went tail slide and hope nobody hit me, because it was, it was basically, I gotta get this thing under control immediately, and there were gliders all around me, and everything worked out really well, but I've still been in, I'm always imagining, the perfect scenario over the water. You're doing 2 stage, and it's so lovely. It's such a nice way to do it. But then switching that to a full combat situation is that still your go-to in a full combat? Would you still do a 2 stage stall? Or would you just go immediately tail slide and deal with it?
Well, it depends what configuration the wing is in. I can't remember the last time I did a stall in anger, because I'd rather the wing was flying and then recognise the situation that it was in, whether it's going into a rotation or parachutal, or if there's a cravat or anything. So there is no, even though I talk about 2 stage and 3 stage stall, it's more about just bringing more awareness to what the wing is doing at the time. So if you've had I don't know why you wanted or needed to take it to the tail slide, whether you'd had a frontal or it had stopped flying anyway, or you were in parachutal, which we call the shit zone. But it's just about having the situational awareness of recognizing those situations and then deciding what you need to do with your hands. If it's already in parachutal or frontaled and not flying, then you can just go to tail slide, because the whole point of the 2 stage stall is to manage the span as it drops into a stall. Where if you're already there or you're in a configuration where the wing is hardly flying, then you don't need to do those certain inputs. So whether it's 2 stage,
Mm.
3 stage, or whatever, it's that's kind of a very simplistic way of looking at the different phases of a stall, and actually it's just about recognizing what phase you're in and what you need to do with your hands. So if what you did worked, then that's what needed to be done.
Yeah, it was a big asymmetric, and it was, looking like cravat. I was, we were in a very, very thick gaggle, and it was just, for me, it was okay. I gotta see what's going on,
Mm.
get control of this thing. And yeah, it was pretty wild. There was a reserve toss in it. And it was a pretty dynamic situation, but I was happy with how it all worked out.
Yeah, I want some
I
footage of this
can't say it was
carnage. It sounds
100%.
entertaining.
Oh, it was awesome. It was very exciting. We were right over big high tension power lines, and I think Matt Beechner was leading, and he was the one that hit it, and his bank up was full Yasin style, just, "Hey, everybody come to me." It was basically a massive wing over. It's like, "Ooh, that's a heater. Let's go there." But then it was just carnage. I mean, there was at least 3, maybe 4 wings that just exploded, and one of them was right after, Alex almost hit me, and I was so glad he didn't. He was one of the ones that was really tight on me and kind of swerved out, and then he got hit and had to throw.
Oh no.
It was Yeah, it was a proper Chelan day. It was great. It was exciting. Well, cool. That's pretty. I think we hit what we needed to hit there. Anything in closing you wanted to hit on these sea wings? Any other words of advice or caution?
I think the thing with choosing any wing is that the problem with us humans is that we don't know what we don't know. We don't know the level of our incompetence, and really that is the true power, is to know the extent of one's ignorance. And without going on a course or speaking to the right people, it's impossible to understand your level. It's never the wing; it's always the pilot, or it's very rarely the wing. There have been some terrible wings made in the past, which you can blame certain things on, but generally the accidents that happen, the things that go wrong, are pilot induced. It's just a lack of knowledge. It's nothing. It's not pointing blame. It's just a very difficult thing to actually understand. Yeah, to try and understand where we're at. So if you get onto a two liner and you think, oh my god, it's a two liner, something's going to be different, then it will be. Your mental attitude towards it will be different, which isn't going to help things. So any wing you fly, I think I said in the last podcast, like I don't look at what certification a wing is anymore, because to me it's irrelevant. I trust on my piloting inputs and my situational awareness. So if you're thinking of moving up to one, really be. The other thing is just to be really honest with your own skill set, because they're really easy to fly. Any wing when it's open is pretty easy to fly. It's when it's closed that the higher up through the categories you go, the more fruity a situation you can get yourself into. So be brutally honest with your own wing control and level, and then do something about it if there's any gaps in your knowledge. Find the pilots that can give you decent feedback, or pay and go on a course where you can get that sort of that feedback. Because for me, I don't care what wing you turn up on. I care what inputs you are doing in what time.
Well said, my friend. Malin, thanks, man. I'll let you get back to your family. We all appreciate your knowledge, and excited to hear you might be coming over to the States for a future SIV. And we'll catch up here very shortly for a full show.
Yeah, great. Good to speak. Cheers, Gavin.
Okay, next question for our Ask Me Anything show. I haven't done one of these in a while. This is fun. Is from Steve Hallsworth. He says, two of my close buddies just came back from the Karakoram with special stories and spectacular photos. Matt Wilkes, who you've heard on the show a couple times, and Ollie Carr. I would love to have gone with them, but new job, so no time to prepare. And then he says, my question is how to know if we are ready, even if we do the training both physical and in the air. How did you know you were ready for Alaska, for example? So I take the position on readiness like I did with sailing all those years ago. 99%, and this is not a real statistic, this is just what I've seen, of people who are preparing to go offshore just prepare forever and never go. You can never really get the boat to where you need. You can never really get the experience you need. You can never get the equipment that you need, depending on budget and all that kind of thing. So you just got to go and learn and get out there and mess about and make mistakes and get better. That's certainly how I did it, and it worked pretty well. I ended up going around the world a couple times, and that's been my approach with flying as well. My first bivvy was with John Sylvester over in Beer, and it was a very modest 50K over the back from Beer, and we spent the night high over Manali, kind of got encased in ice. It was so cold that night, and then in the morning, took off from right where we landed the night before and flew back over Beer, and we were a couple thousand feet over launch when people were just setting up to go. So very special, and kind of set the stage for many adventures in the future. But so I guess the answer is go for it. Why not? Life is short. I don't think you're ever going to feel fully prepared, but I would definitely suggest, certainly from a bivvy standpoint, the sexiest way to do that is to be doing quite a bit of top landing and not have to hike up from the valley bottom. And top landing is certainly one of the more dangerous things we do flying. So, having really good wing control skills, being able to touch down and do top landings in the meat of the day is certainly a high risk. So you want to have really good ground handling skills and just solid experience in that department, rather than just trying to do that on the first time you go out and try to bivvy. So starting small is always a good idea. And, bivvy and multi-day XC adventures can be done in most people's backyard, some easier than others, but you can do little adventures that require very little prep, just a little bit of food. You don't even need a stove or a mat or anything. You just sleep in your wing if you like to go that style. But I like having a pad and a bag and a tent and all that stuff. So if you can carry a little bit more weight, you can add more gear and be more comfortable and just go do it a little bit. And then you'll gain confidence and you can start edging up into bigger and bigger missions What I would say when it comes to really big missions like Alaska or the Rockies Traverse or what they're doing over in Pakistan is, you are going to be hit, no doubt, with the unexpected and conditions that are probably not recreational. So you want to make sure your pilot skills are up to snuff and you want to be mindful for sure of things like high altitude and exhaustion and dehydration, all these things that require more margin. As you heard on the show with Bill Beninati, who's a real high altitude expert, even people who are incredibly physically well trained and have thousands and thousands of hours in the sky are going to be operating at something less than 100%. What that is depends on the day, but something less when you're operating at high altitude. And combine that with much thinner air, so you're moving through the air faster. So places like the Karakoram in Pakistan and Bir, where you're really tall, just require a lot more margin, both mentally and uh, physically in terms of your spatial margin with objects. So you just got to go in with the knowledge that you're going to turn things down. You're not going to be operating at 100% volume. So turn it down, have fun, try to keep it fun, and try to fly within the rails, within the margins that you've set. Try to avoid as much as you can peer pressure, and yeah, go for it. You know, uh, ships are safe in harbor, but that's not what they're built for. I like that quote. Last question for this Ask Me Anything show came from Derek Shuljan. I'm probably butchering your name, buddy. I'm sorry. He actually says no need to make this onto the show, but I wanted to include it because it's a good one. Wondering if you had a suggestion for a 10-day intro to Volbiv trip in the Alps for someone like himself. Then he gives some background. I don't think background really matters too much. As I just said in the last one, I think we should just be going for it, doing these things. But many people haven't been to the Alps, find it quite daunting. It is a huge, vast region for flying. And I get this question a ton: where should I go? And the answer is it doesn't really matter. The Alps are vast. If you stretch it over into Slovenia and then come west all the way over to Mont Blanc and then start heading south down through Annecy and down through the Maritimes all the way down to Monaco, basically the X-Alps course when it used to go to Monaco. There are just so many flying zones. It would be exhaustive and quite tiring for me to even start listing them here. So there are regions, the Pinzgau and the Zugspitze area and the Dolomites and the Maritimes and Fiche, the Valais and the Rhone and the Rhine. These are all, amazing areas, but basically if you're just following the spine of the Alps, weather can often be quite different on the south side or the north side. Föhn is your biggest enemy there. And if you're willing to move around, then you can really follow the weather. Everything always comes from the west. So, you can get behind it or get in front of it and move accordingly. There's great public transportation all over most of the Alps. And so it's easy to get on a plane and jump ship. But that gets pretty exhaustive and you often, weather moves pretty fast. So sometimes it's better to just sit tight in a certain area that you want to play in and try to session it as best you can. So in general, you'd like to be over there. We get some great days in April, some huge big banger days, but they're fewer and far between than May and then June. And then typically July, August are your best summer months. September can still be incredible, even though things are cooling off and the days aren't going to be nearly as long. July and August tend to get more stable in the Alps. So to really cover distance, you've got to be up in the much higher terrain, which means either in Switzerland, up in the Valais, on either side of the Furka Pass, the Eiger side, or more towards Kur and Davos. But to get above the inversions, you typically got to be pretty tall to start the day. But you don't have to be, and you can still have really good flights even when it starts getting really hot and more stable. Valley winds become more of an issue in July and August, pretty much across the Alps. So on the big high pressure days, you can get more valley winds as things start to heat up. My personal favorite has always been kind of late May and June because you still have a lot of snow. There's tons of water. There's water everywhere in the Alps. You don't have to worry about that with bivvy, which is one of the great things about doing bivvies in the Alps. But I like June, even though, when you're up tall, it can be quite a bit colder. So you need bigger gloves, more clothes and that kind of thing. But it's not nearly as busy, and the kids are still in school. So things aren't, the public transport's pretty open, and the roads are less busy. Places are just less busy. As you get into July and August, things obviously get a lot more busy, especially in the Dolomites. The common thinking in the past was always that the Dolomites, really the sweet season there is in September because they're quite a bit spicier and quite a bit stronger. I guess that's still true, although I like the Dolomites anytime it's good. It's always really good down there. So yeah, really you can't go wrong. If you've never been, Annecy is a must. You've got to get there. They have the Borns to fly and the Chablais and a bunch of hike and fly races in that zone for a reason. Tons of that stuff is top landable. It's all very easily bivvyable, but it is pretty much everywhere. I don't know of any places that don't suit for multi-day hike and fly camping adventures. It all works pretty well. There are areas like the Sud Tyrol that are a lot more treed, but still the valleys are great. The tops of stuff are usually clear. There's grass everywhere. So not very specific, but hopefully encouraging. If you got the time and you can make it happen, go for it. You'll learn a lot. You'll have a lot of fun. You don't have to hike on any given day. There's gondolas and chairlifts everywhere, so you can take a day off, get on a chairlift, take it easy, or you can go hardcore. Hansa just finished another one with his son. I think this is the 8th or 9th year in a row. This year they made it from Annecy all the way to Monaco, just the two of them doing their tandem gig. And at the end, I think they walked 40K down to Monaco in a straight line, so much more than that by real time. But it all worked, and they're stoked. So they've put it together from the start in Salzburg, where it used to be anyway, all the way down to Monaco. Pretty special. So if those guys can do it tandem, you can do it. Have fun. Cheers. If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear
We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.